I want to give my testimony on the fact that when I was more or less 12 or 13 years old, this book came to my house alone, I mean for itself, and it was the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. It happens 3 times in my life. The book arrived alone, without me buying it. That's what happened. A nephew of my aunt who was not related to me, but she was still my aunt's nephew by my aunt's husband, and here, it happened that this girl, we were, more or less in the mid-60s, and this girl, decided that she wanted to go to India by hitchhiking, and in fact she went, and then she put all the books in a trunk and gave it to our common aunt. But it happens that a few years later, my aunt too, she must leave for Canada from Italy, and therefore all her furniture and also books and also this trunk, my aunt took all of them to my mother's house, and so my mother and my father, they have put the trunk with books inside in our cellar. I was a very lonely child, I was always alone, and this was perhaps a strange problem for my family, because I loved being alone, and we had, luckily, a very large house. It happens that when you live a life apart, you are more active and more creative, maybe for boring, and so one day I went to this cellar, our cellar, because I had the keys. I entered, and so I find the trunk that was not closed by a key, and so it was easy to open it, and inside were, and I don't want to be exaggerate, but at least 100 books, so it was full, and I started reading all the titles, and I realized that many of these titles didn't interest me at all. Yes, they didn't interest me, or they were novels, or they were of psychology matter or something like that, and so to a certain moment I found some Zen books and Autobiography of a Yogi, and also the Synthesis of Yoga by Sri Aurobindo. So it were only these 3 or 4 books I was interested to. So until here I had never heard of East or India because I was so young, 12, 13 years old, and Google not exist yet that times. However, these 3, 4, or 5 books that I mentioned before, intrigued me a lot, and then I brought them up home. I immediately started reading the Synthesis of Yoga by Sri Aurobindo. I read it completely, but I did not understand almost, maybe anything. However, I read it all, because there was something in my head that made me insist on reading, even if I didn't understand a lot, and in hindsight today, I understand that I was not an easy child as usually young boys are. I have surely some problem that made me be better than worse, be different from other children, because there was as an inner obligation to read certain subjects, even if maybe I didn't want to read them, but I felt compelled to read them, as an inner strength, almost a form of schizophrenia, or maybe it was a light form to Tourette syndrome, that forced me to read. This force that forced me to read, and so I read all the Synthesis of the Yoga by Sri Aurobindo. And I repeat, I understand very little, perhaps nothing. However, there was also a beautiful photo of Sri Aurobindo, on the 2nd page or 3rd page. A beautiful face, really a beautiful face. I also read the Aurobindo's biography on the preface in the book about Sri Aurobindo, and I was intrigued by his life and all, but the contents of the book I did not understand very well, and I repeat, probably because it was the first book I read on Oriental philosophies, and therefore, I took a break, between one book to another, and then after some weeks I started to read another book, and I spent some time reading the Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And since it was a biography that did not speak in philosophical terms words but told about his life, and it was a biography written directly by him, then a real autobiography, and then I began to understand everything, all the terminologies, slowly became part of my repertoire of knowledge about India on philosophies orientals. Yes, it was easier to understand the content when they are described as a biography, rather than as a text of philosophy. With the first book, the mistake or the unconscious mistake was that I first read the Synthesis of Yoga by Aurobindo, and I understood practically nothing but some terminology of Oriental philosophy I start to get inside my head when I started reading Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. But we all know he wrote it, but I love to repeat his name, and I started reading not only because I understood everything but also because I was eager to know the contents. That gave me extraordinary energy. Shortly thereafter I wanted to go to India, but I never went. I was so young and probably not very brave, because I know about boys at 14 years of age in those times, who hitchhiked and went to India and became gurus and became swami, so I had this temptation too, but I didn't have the courage to really go. However, apart from this cowardice, I didn't have the courage to hitchhike as many did. However, all the autobiography of a yogi entered my mind by reading it as if it were the most beautiful movie I ever seen. It completely conditioned my being. Sometimes I wonder, but without reading this book I don't know what my life would have been, because it helped me being calm, helped me being patient with life, but especially with others, because it is not always easy being patient with others, and helped me to choose not to eat meat anymore, and this for all the days of my life, even if I never liked meat, or any food item, for which there is a killing derivation. Perhaps even before reading Autobiography of a Yogi or in parallel, I always thought when I came given a plate of slices of meat, I thought, but what I am eating. Once they were a breathing cow, that had sensations, and therefore, I put these mouthfuls of meat in my mouth, I chewed it for minutes and minutes and minutes, that at some point it was impossible to send them down, and in fact I spat them out, with great concern of my mother, who was not aware of what thoughts crossed my mind, that forced me to refuse the meat meals, and then I started over. Do not eat it anymore. It starts it's 14 years until my 16th, then they all tell you, in the family, but the proteins, where do you take the proteins? Also because in those times there was the hypothesis that proteins were important also, if today the opposite also thinks, and therefore I had a slightly strong flu, like 39 temperature, and it was the beginning of the 70s, so it weakened me a little, and therefore, I was convinced to eat meat again. I probably had feelings of guilt, but to regain strength, I continued to eat meat, and maybe for a few months, maybe for a year or two, but at a certain point, I said this is enough, and I stopped eating meat for all the day of my life, and so many decades have passed, that I have never eaten any food, that it came from killing animals. Sometimes I eat eggs, but like an egg every 6-7 years, but I also know that many gurus during their life have eaten eggs, and then maybe they stopped at some point of their life. There is a story of Mahatma Gandhi who says, that one of her nieces, and it is written in the Autobiography of a Yogi, well, one of his nieces had been badly weakened. The attending doctor suggested that the girl ate some eggs, and Mahatma Gandhi, who was very strict in feeding even for her grandchildren, was in crisis and looking for a solution, so the doctor suggested him, and if the girls ate unfertilized eggs? And then Mahatma Gandhi consented. The girl ate eggs, but did not have to be fertilized at all, and therefore had to come from hens that had not seen the rooster from a long time. And this is an anecdote that I remember reading right inside the Autobiography of a Yogi. And then anyway, I don't want to go too long, but I believe that in my generation, many boys of my age, started taking drugs, and very strong drugs like heroin or things like this, or even most simply smoking normal cigarettes or drinking alcohol in exaggerate way. Well, I pass unscathed in this historical period and bad habit, where everyone fell into this alcohol smoking and drugs as trap, and I went completely unscathed, because of the teachings written in this book, because for me it is a sacred book, so it has given me the strength to never fall into temptation, and I have never had a temptation to fall in those danger-use habit. Surely I have not become a guru, and I am not very good with yoga, maybe because I have not been persevering with practicing, and also with mantra or meditation and all these things. I'm not a master at all. However, reading this book, it has helped me in the life of every day, or everyday life. I don't know what I would have done or what I would have been, without these sacred teachings, because life often gives us some different choices, which are not easy to overcome, but thanks to the inner strength that has instilled me, by this book, Autobiography of a Yogi, it is as if the minefield of adolescence and of youth, I overcome them, without falling into those dangers. Dying is not a problem, but if you die because you made mistakes or serious life path errors, that are not surely sins, but are tests, I really did want to contaminate the sacredness of my body, and therefore I must say thanks to this book, because it helped me to live, otherwise I would not have had the courage to live. Now I close this written talking with you here, because it's all. Thanks if you have listened to me. Hope it will be and help for all of you too, this very small testimony of mine.